I was gone for 24 days. I came home to a new sign on my door, Harbor Rise Sales Office. Inside, strangers poured cold brew where my coffee pot used to sit. And the woman at the door, she wore my pearls. "You signed the paper," she said. "I didn't. I was learning to breathe again in rehab while someone tried to sign my life away in ink." If anyone's ever taken something from you with a smile and a clipboard, keep listening. Because tonight, I call a reporter. Tomorrow, the Attorney General. And before this week is over, I'm walking into a room where they plan to ratify my eviction with a notary who doesn't ask questions, a doctor's letter I've never seen, and a family that calls theft care. They think I'm alone. I'm not. I have names. I have records. I have my name back, and I'm about to turn their streamlined plan into evidence. This isn't just a house. It's my ledger, my life, my harbor. And tonight, the tide turns. By the time the rideshare rolled to a stop beneath the live oaks, my name had already vanished from the house I paid off with a lifetime of budget meetings and late-night spreadsheets. The brass plate that said "The Colemans" used to hang beside the front door, polished by Anthony's thoughtful hands every spring. Now a glossy acrylic sign caught the light in a way that felt cruel. Harbor Rise Sales Office. I stood there with my small suitcase making a nervous tremor against the brick, listening to the marsh birds and someone's laughter from inside. I've been gone 24 days. Rehab for a stubborn bout of pneumonia that turned my chest into a percussion section. 24 days of relearning breath. That's all it took for strangers to hang a new sign over my life. The front door opened before I reached it. Sloane tipped her chin, cool and immaculate. Pearls I recognized at her throat. My pearls. Anthony gave them to me on the night I finished my MBA while working full-time for the district. I noticed that detail before I noticed the folding table in my living room, the stacks of glossy brochures, the cold brew dispenser, and the two men in navy polos discussing sight lines to a marina that did not exist. "You weren't due until tomorrow," Sloane said. Not Mom, not Miri, not anything softer than a sharp edge. "We were going to walk you through the transition." "Step aside," I said. My voice sounded like those nights I presented to hostile board members, steady by choice, not by mercy. "I live here." "You signed the documents," she said, not moving. "Evan executed them while you were ill. It's safer this way. For your care, for the asset, we can help you find something appropriate." Appropriate, I heard myself say. Is that what you call stealing a woman's life while she's learning to breathe again? One of the polo men glanced over, then busied himself with floor plans. The other looked at Sloane for instruction, and Sloane's jaw worked in a rhythm I knew well from the time she pretended to listen. She shifted one step closer to the door, but not aside. A stranger in a headset walked past my antique sideboard, used his tablet to scan my walls like they were data points. "Please don't embarrass yourself," Sloane said softly. "We can bring your personal things to wherever you're staying." For a second, the world tilted and the air in my lungs turned thick, the way it did on the worst days in rehab before the respiratory therapist taught me a trick to slow everything down. I focused on a small, real thing, the chip in the blue fishbowl on the foyer table. Then I turned around, pulled my suitcase into the afternoon heat, and walked away. If you're watching this or listening to me now, tell me which city you're in. Sometimes all you want at the end of a long day is to hear that there's still a map of people out there, dots and names, a country of strangers who would open their door if you knocked. The motel off Victory Drive smelled like bleach and fried shrimp. I set the chain, sat on the edge of the bed with the floral comforter, and pulled the emergency card from my wallet. I'd kept it behind my driver's license for years, half out of superstition, half because it made me feel like I still had a lever to pull. Raya Patel, Savannah Ledger. She'd written the procurement story I couldn't speak as a school district CFO, back when the contractor who smiled the nicest billed the ugliest. She answered on the second ring like she'd been leaning toward the phone all day. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start with the pearls." I started with the pearls. That night, the papers in my lab looked like a battlefield. My discharge summary with Dr. Chow's neat signature, a copy of the deed recorded when Anthony and I finished paying it down, the Christmas photo of Evan at 6 in his dinosaur pajamas on the steps I painted pale blue. I sent Raya the parcel ID and the names I'd gathered. Harbor Rise Development, the Whitlock Group, Sloane's maiden name that she repeated like a credential. "Give me an hour," she said. "Keep your phone on. Eat something if they left you any appetite." I was buttering a stale biscuit from the lobby when she called back, voice clipped, like she does when she's arranging facts on a mental table. "Your parcel shows a transfer last week," she said. "Grantee, Harbor Rise, LLC. Consideration is $10 and other valuable." That's lawyer for "we'd rather not say." Signature says Miriam L. Coleman, notarized. The notary logs dozens of Whitlock documents. I pulled the power of attorney too, springing, but it looks like someone jumped the spring. In English? In English, if this paper were honest, it would only spring into effect if you lacked capacity. It claims you did last week. It's witnessed by a neighbor who shouldn't be, and the same notary. It's ugly. And it's fast. I was counting breaths into a plastic thing last week, bored out of my skull, fully myself. "Then we need someone with a badge who cares about fully yourself," she said. "I'm looping in an AG contact, Elder and Consumer Protection Unit. His name is Deshaun. He will not hold your hand, but he will hold a line." I slept that night with my shoes still on. Morning came like low tide, slow, inexorable, leaving things on the sand you didn't know you owned. The motel coffee was bitter, and the air smelled of rain and diesel. I walked 2 blocks to my street in a ball cap and my oldest cardigan, and stood long enough under the live oaks that a neighbor walking her corgi slowed to see if I needed help. Across from my house, someone had set out a sandwich board in tasteful navy and white, "Private Preview, Harbor Rise." A man with a lanyard asked if I was on the list. I said I was the list and kept walking. Back at the motel, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. "This is Deshaun Miller with the Attorney General's office," the voice said, unhurried. "Miss Patel briefed me. I'll be clear. I can't promise outcomes, but I can promise to preserve facts. Are you safe?" I said, "As safe as anyone who lost her nameplate." "Good. Don't go back in the house. If anyone tries to move money, call my direct line." "Will you tell me if I'm being dramatic?"
"I've been doing this long enough to know you're not," he said. "You'd be shocked how often someone smooth calls, seizing an elder's assets, helping with care." The first text from Evan came at 2:14 a.m., like he knew I wasn't sleeping. "We moved some funds for your care. Don't stress, Sloane's parents are pros." The word care in black letters on a bright screen. I pictured him at 12, the night he came home with a scraped knee, and Anthony poured peroxide over that small wound and blew on it so the sting would feel like a game. I pictured him at 22, so sure of himself he could convince the sun to come up on command. I held the phone until the letters blurred. We met at a coffee shop Rhea swore by because the espresso tasted like someone cared and the back table was quiet. Rhea introduced me to a woman with cropped hair and a scar along one thumb she didn't bother to hide. "This is Carol. She calls judges by their first names and knows which clerks cry if you're mean to them." Make a list, Caro said to me, like we were already in the middle. We need 3 things fast: a temporary restraining order on any transfer related to your parcel, a capacity certification from the physician who actually treated you, and a notary audit. If someone filed a guardianship petition claiming you're impaired, we cut it off at the knees. I talk like this when I'm mad. I can work with mad, I said, pulling my discharge summary from my bag. Dr. Chow can fax whatever she needs to. Don't fax. Email it to my assistant who does not sleep, and I will walk it to the courthouse. You are a CFO. Good. Your ledger brain will keep us honest. If I push too fast, you tell me where the numbers disagree with my speed. He means well, Rhea said, amused. He knows the system, I said, and felt something in my chest unclench. Maybe trust, maybe a lesser version of it. Rhea pulled up the city planning agenda on her laptop. Harbor Rise is trying to pull a zoning text amendment through next week. Mixed-use waterfront district. Minimum acreage matches your block and the 3 beyond. They're not just flipping a house, they're flipping a grid. Policy as scalpel. Efficient. Bloodless if you don't watch the tray. I'm going to pull ownership on the neighboring parcels. New LLCs are popping like mushrooms in damp. Same registered agent, same UPS box. When names hide, patterns show. I wasn't brave enough to go home. I was exactly brave enough to walk the block and count. Eleanor and Dr. Gresham across the way had a discreet sign in their yard for an estate attorney who priced themselves out of compassion years ago. The little green bungalow 2 doors down already had 2 vans in the driveway and a roll-off dumpster out front. I counted 5 mailboxes with new locks. The radius felt deliberate, like a compass point set at my front door and spun in a slow mechanical circle.
Deshaun called at lunch. If you can meet me outside your place around dusk, we can serve a preservation order for documents and devices, he said. We won't tip our hand to everything. We'll just insist that nothing disappears. Bring someone with you, not your son. Raya will be there, I said. Carol will want to be everywhere at once, but she says she needs to pick a judge like a surgeon picks a scalpel. You pick good people, he said, and hung up. The side gate sticks where the brick heaves just enough, and if you lift it, it'll clear without a scrape. Anthony and I never fixed it because it felt like a secret. One of those tiny domestic codes that remind you home is a place you know with your hands, not your GPS. I slid through at dusk with a small camera clipped to my shirt and the bracelet Carol insisted I wear. Press once and the world with a badge knew where I was. Press twice and it shouted. I'd almost made it through the kitchen to my study when I heard voices, the cool plain of a woman's tone and a male baritone I didn't recognize. Whitlock 3 is clean, the man said, like he was ordering a sandwich. Title curative in progress. Harvey says the notary log is tight. And the guardianship petition? The woman asked. I stopped in the hall because my body insisted. Guardianship. I had written budgets for guardianships for students who needed champions. It was a word that could be beautiful if honest people held it, a weapon if not. Emergency hearing scheduled Monday. If she objects, we have Dr. Levin's letter. I felt my breath go shallow. I didn't know a Dr. Levin, but I know a lie wearing a lab coat. I stepped into the doorway. The desk Anthony and I refinished during the summer Evan was 8 was turned so it faced the door instead of the marsh, an affront a stranger would not understand and I would never forgive. Victor Whitlock was as tall as Sloane's stories made him, silver hair and the kind of tan that came from other people's decks. Sloane stood with a neat folder and a smile pitched to convince a mortgage broker his conscience was optional. You don't belong here, he said. And yet I'm here, which means I do. You signed the power of attorney. This is all something you asked for when you were sick. I'd love to see the wet ink original and the notary journal. While you're at it, I'd like to see Dr. Levin. I'm very curious who he thinks I am. Get out, Victor said, stepping toward me.
I'll leave when I've taken one photo for my memory book, I said, holding up my phone. I pressed the bracelet instead. It warmed like a coin in my palm. There was a knocking that sounded like the state politely clearing its throat. Deshawn's voice is the kind of calm that makes people with something to hide confess things they forgot they did. Mr. Whitlock, Ms. Whitlock Coleman, we have a preservation order for devices and documents related to this parcel and any pending guardianship filings involving Miss Coleman. We'll be taking copies now. Sloan laughed, fine porcelain cracking. You can't. We can, and we will. Victor moved like he thought he could outmuscle process. Process doesn't spook. It just keeps walking until you're tired of your own lies. I handed Deshawn my phone with 3 photos and a short audio clip that would not change the world, but might change the mood of a judge who used to love his grandmother.
By morning, Carol had a copy of the guardianship petition, filed under seal, the sort of petty secrecy cowards think is protection. The clerk misspelled my middle name, which made me want to bake her cookies and help her sort her incoming mail for a month. The petition claimed I was unable to manage my affairs and needed the court to name me someone's responsibility. Dr. Levin had written a letter on letterhead that would make a first-year med student weep with secondhand embarrassment. The notary's attestation was a photocopy of a photocopy. It said little and announced more. I called Dr. Chow from the Rehab unit. She sounded overjoyed to be helpful to a patient who remembered her name. She dictated an affidavit over good coffee and sent it with scanned copies of my cognitive assessments, all of which said I was stubborn and oriented and more interested in the quality of the hospital spreadsheets than a healthy person ought to be. That afternoon, Raya sat with me in a diner with red vinyl booths and read out a list of LLC names so comically bland it could have been a sketch. Ogeechee Properties, River Finch, Left Bank. She traced each to the same registered agent, the same UPS box, the same auto-drafted monthly fees. It was almost sweet, the predictability of greed. She looked at the dates, she said, clustered around your hospitalization, clustered around Eleanor and Dr. Gresham's difficulties. Victor is most dangerous when someone is tired. The next call with Evan made my hands shake so badly I pressed the edge of the formica into my palm until sensation returned. He said, "We should have told you. Not quite crying, not quite composed. We moved some funds into custodial accounts for your care. Victor set them up. Sloan said this would streamline things." I said, "You mean make it easy for you?" And I watched the traffic on Victory, the endless procession of pickup trucks and sedans, and one bicycle with a basket carrying someone's groceries. I said, "Did you sit in my study and say the word guardianship out loud?" He said, "I didn't understand. I thought it was a technical word." I said, "When you say technical, what you mean is someone else's problem." And I pulled the phone from my ear because I needed my next breath more than I needed his explanation. It wasn't all paper. The paper was only the skeleton. The flesh was people. Eleanor came over with banana bread wrapped in a floral towel and an envelope. She sat on the motel bed like it was her aunt's couch and told me how a man from Harbor Rise said it would be easiest this way. Easiest to let them plan for her husband's memory care and the sale. A notary arrived who moved through pages so fast, Eleanor didn't have time to ask what a word meant. A man in a suit claimed he was with the city. He wasn't. He was with a mailing list. They used my husband's condition like a key. We don't keep a lot in savings, Miriam. The house is the thing. It's all the years he took call. It's all the Sundays we said no so our Mondays could be something. I'm going to make them say that last part out loud in front of someone in a robe. "Do you think it will help?" she asked. "I don't know, but I know I'll get to hear them try." We recorded Eleanor's account and gave copies to Deshawn. He didn't say, "Good job." He said, "I need 3 more like that," in the same voice you use when you ask for salt. I gave him names.
The green bungalow 2 doors down, the brick house on the corner where the hydrangeas used to bloom like a row of small C's, a widow named Alma who kept her curtains open and waved to everyone. The bank froze 2 wires after Caro camped in their lobby and spoke with the voice other customers turned to look at. A 3rd wire bounced. A 4th was under review. A man from the bank's fraud unit called to say there was a voice authorization that sounded like me and wasn't me. The clerk who processed it had been rushed, and the son standing next to the desk had nodded. The notary was more interesting. She was a mobile operator who swore when Deshawn asked her that she always checks ID. Her phone pinged 3 towers near my street on the morning she swore she was in Pooler. That ping will not convict. It will make a judge pinch the bridge of his nose. The thing about storms is that they do the courtesy of warning you. Pressure drops, birds fly funny, your hairline feels like it's trying to hear. This didn't feel like a storm. It felt like noon on a day someone decided to steal your shadow. Sloan scheduled a ratification signing with 3 other owners, the kind of quiet events thieves like best. Caro suggested, politely, that we crash the party. She said, "We'll bring a notary who reads. Raya will bring a pen that listens. Deshawn will be 2 doors down. You'll bring your pearls, because that woman is not allowed to make you afraid of your own jewelry." I put them on in the motel bathroom, feeling their weight like fact, not ornament. In the mirror, I saw the woman I was when Anthony fixed the attic fan and asked me to hand him the screwdriver, not the woman Sloan thought she could fold into storage. They rented a conference room at a co-working space so new the paint smell hadn't surrendered. Victor spread papers like a dealer, corners aligned. Sloan sat with her smile set to reasonable. The notary wore a blazer and a look that said she'd rather be anywhere else. Eleanor sat by the door, hands folded around her purse like prayer. "This is a ratification," Victor said, "just cleaning up a minor clerical issue on prior deeds. Initial here and here." "Before I initial anything," I said, "I'd love to hear the notary explain how she verified me last time when I wasn't in the city." The notary looked at her nails in the way of people who understand they are inside someone else's story. "She had ID," she said. "Which kind?" I asked. "The kind they print on plastic and laminate behind the coffee shop, or the kind the DMV gives you with a photo that looks like a person, not a blur?" "Sign the page, Miriam," Sloan said, smile thinning. "I'll sign something," I said, "but I want to understand why a deed transferring my home references a preferred care partner called Memory Oak Senior Living. What does where I sleep have to do with who owns my house?" "Bundled services," Victor said. "We take care of our own." "I am not yours," I said, and put the pen down. I pressed the bracelet. 30 seconds later, the door opened for men and women so unfailingly polite they made the room itch. "Mr. Whitlock, Miss Whitlock Coleman," Deshawn said, "we'll take those documents now." They didn't scream. They didn't run. Harbor thieves rarely do. They recede like tide, quietly, insistently, sure they will be back with a different moon. After that day, the calendar became a machine. The Planning Commission continued Harbor Rise's application, pending investigation, and I watched Eleanor cry in the parking lot, relief tears, not because the condos were paused, but because someone used the word pause where she could hear it. Carl filed motions so clean they folded themselves. A judge granted a temporary injunction on transfers relating to my parcel and 3 adjacent LLCs. The bank reversed 2 wires. The 3rd is still a story people tell new hires to scare them into checking voice authorizations twice.
Evan met with Deshawn without any lawyer whose watch cost more than a semester at the college with the good live oaks. He looked 20 again and 60 at the same time. He said, "I lost money." Victor said he could make it right. Then there were papers. Sloan said we could streamline your life. She meant remove you. I said, "You called me a burden. You called the woman who stayed up with you when you had strep and sang awful songs to make you laugh. You called her a problem to be solved." He said, "I'm ashamed." And the words sounded like a door unlatched at last. I said, "Good. Shame is a start. It's not a map. You'll need a map." He took a deal. Cooperate fully, testify where needed, stick to a restitution schedule most men underestimate. Sloan found a lawyer who looked like a real estate listing and stared at me through corridors like I was the thief. The thing about futures is that you can steal them grain by grain or wreck them in an afternoon with a pen. Both methods look tidy when you print them on nice paper. I moved back into my house the day the forensics team finished dusting it for a story. I put the brass plate back up myself and let my name be heavy again. Inside, I found small violations and petty changes that made my teeth ache. The desk turned away from the marsh, new curtains that made the room a photograph instead of a place where we lived. My recipe box was gone from the kitchen counter, replaced by an expensive cookbook that pages that didn't know butter. The FBI found the box in a Whitlock storage unit next to a crate of vinyl Anthony collected in his 20s. They logged it as evidence and promised to return it, which is the sort of promise that feels like the rain check on joy. That first night back, I couldn't sleep in my bed. I sat on the porch swing with a quilt over my knees and listened to the marsh breathe. Across the street, Eleanor's light glowed in her front room like a neighbor's lighthouse. I thought of Anthony's last letter to Evan, hidden in the back of the desk drawer. The envelope that said, "For my son when he needs it most." I had tucked it away 3 years ago, thinking maybe college graduation, maybe his first baby, maybe a day when Joy needed a witness. I did not think of a conference room where he would confess to cutting the rope and calling it a gift.
When I gave it to him in the visitation room, no glass, no orange, just a patient brown with state-issued pens, he opened it with shaking hands. He read his father's handwriting and made a sound I cannot describe without telling on my heart. "What will you do when you've done your time?" I asked. "When your sentence is over and the world looks at you sideways?" He said, "I don't know. My job is gone. My savings are gone. My last name is still worth something to you and nothing to anyone else." "You rebuild," I said. "You rebuild like a woman who hired a man to fix her attic fan and then learned to do it herself because he went to work one morning and didn't come home. You rebuild like a boy who fell off his bike and learned to like the scar because it told a story where he was the one who stood up." "Will you forgive me?" he asked. And it was the first honest question he asked me since he was 10. Forgiveness is not an event. It's a process. Right now, I am angry and sad and stubborn. I can hold love and anger in the same hand. I have since the day you threw a baseball through the den window. How our relationship looks later depends on whether you become a man your father would recognize. He nodded. He doesn't cry where anyone can see. He never did. He held the letter against his chest and told me he was sorry in 12 ways that sounded like 12 different men. Some I will never meet again. One I hope to know. News moves on. People don't. The Whitlocks wanted this to be a story that turned into a sentence and then into silence. Raya made sure it stayed a story. Her articles were clean blades, dates, names, links, not an adjective wasted. She wrote about a city where development doesn't have to mean erasure, and about elders who deserve to be asked and not told. Comments were the usual mess.
People who wanted to talk about their neighbor's cousin's uncle who did something similar. People who wanted to argue about property rights versus decency. I read until my eyes ached, then made tea and turned off my phone like a ritual. Weeks stacked like clean dishes. The Planning Commission voted down the text amendment for Harborize, a small miracle given how those rooms work when money size. The bank held a lecture for its staff called Round Numbers Lie, which I suggested they embroider on something. Carol convinced me to speak at the senior center. I wore flats because the floor was slippery and wrote an outline that looked like a gentle sword fight. How to talk to your children before you let them talk about you. How to find an attorney who calls you back. Why a notary's journal matters. Why you should bring someone with you who asks where the pens came from. I said guardian and watched the room flinch. I said protective and watched shoulders relax. Words matter. They can pry. They can shelter. I dreamed about Anthony the night before I planted the camellias again. In the dream, he was sitting at the desk facing the marsh like a man who still believes in ships. He said one line that sounded like him all over. Healing doesn't erase the wound. It turns it into a scar you can use to tell other people how you survived. I woke up and touched the place on my chest where my breath used to catch and found it smooth. Not smooth because nothing happened, smooth because something did, and the world kept going anyway.
A month later, I got a certified letter. It used words like quiet title and distant air. And if I had not been the sort of woman who reads every line 3 times and then reads it out loud, I might have tossed it in the recycle with the catalogs. The letter claimed a woman in Oregon was a niece of my grandmother and that an interest in my property had ripened, such a generous verb, by virtue of a probate oversight in 1961. It was the sort of thin con an honest man would laugh at and a tired clerk would stamp. I brought it to Carol and watched her smile like she'd been handed a crossword puzzle she'd been waiting to solve. It's synthetic. They built an identity out of 3 real facts and 1 fake. It would get a default judgment if you didn't answer. We answer. Do I get to do anything? I asked. You get to bake me a pie, she said. Chess if you want to make the judge like us. We answered. The judge wrote a short opinion that said in blessedly stern words, you may not shop for a family tree like you shop for a coffee. He wrote it the way a man writes when he wants a paragraph framed on a clerk's wall. Raya wrote about it without adjectives and still made me cry. Eleanor and I started walking most mornings before the heat settled like a quilt. She talked about her years teaching sophomore English, and I talked about the district's messy budget seasons and the way teenagers can smell when adults are lying. We'd stop to look at the marsh, and she'd point out birds I still confuse. Sometimes Dr. Gresham came and said he remembered something from 1972, and we'd all cheer like he'd crossed a finish line. Small victories are still victories. Some days they're the only kind we get. I expanded Anthony's scholarship fund into something broader, something that looked like him and me at the same time. We called it the Coleman Harbor Trust because Anthony believed in harbors, and I believe in names that do more than sit on a brochure. We gave small grants to clinics and legal aid for notarizations and ran Saturday workshops in the library with cookies at the end because sugar persuades where rhetoric fails. We paid for a class to train guardian ad litem who could tell the difference between helping and holding. We printed a 1-page checklist that said, bring someone you trust, ask 3 questions even if you think you know the answers, never sign while you're hungry. People trip on hunger more than they trip on textiles. I taught that to a room of men who looked like they'd never made a sandwich and watched them write it down. I kept the desk facing the marsh. On good days, I left the windows open so the way the marsh breathes in and out could be the metronome under my work. On bad days, I closed everything and made soup and called Gloria, the friend I made in grad school who moved to Seattle and answers every 3rd Thursday like clockwork, and told her the whole story from the beginning until she said, you are not made of what they call you. You're made of what you call back.
Evan wrote me once a week from the minimum security facility where he learned to live with himself. He did not ask me for anything. He told me he joined a class that planted beans and made a soup at the end. He told me he reads the book his father left him every winter, some big historical thing with small type that Anthony loved because it forced him to commit, and that sometimes he stops to copy out a sentence and send it to me because it sounds like a better man than he is. He asked if I would visit again when I was ready. I told him I would. On the drive home after the first visit, I cried in a way I don't recommend while navigating a roundabout. On the second visit, I told him a story about the time he was 2 and thought he could fly because he jumped from the second step and landed on both feet. He laughed and covered his face and told me that is exactly how his brain works when he's not careful.
Sloan wrote me exactly once. It was a letter on paper that smelled expensive, and it said she never meant to hurt me and that she thought of me often. The last paragraph listed the ways she believed she was wronged by the state. I put it in a drawer behind a casserole dish and forgot where I put it. I like to think that counts as grace. The day the roses bloomed again, I sat on the back steps and let the smell hit me like a memory. The hydrangeas took longer, sulking until I cut them back like an apology. The camellias accepted my terms. Not everything returns. Some things don't want to. That's their right. We plant anyway. The neighborhood began to look like a place again, and not a staging area. Kids chalked the sidewalk, and their games made rules so complicated I felt I needed a spreadsheet. I offered to be the scorer with the colored pens. Their faces made me 15 years younger. A man 2 blocks over started a tool library, and I donated the drill I hate because it's too heavy, but men insist it's the right one. The little green bungalow got new porch light fixtures, and I learned the name of the woman who bought it out of foreclosure because she liked the way the kitchen faced east. She bakes bread on Sundays. I can smell it from my porch if the wind is right. Sometimes I still wake at 2:14 a.m. and imagine a text lighting my phone with a sentence that tries to turn me into a problem again. When that happens, I get up and wash my hands and sit at the desk and write names. People who held the rope for me when I was too tired to climb. Raya, who writes without giving herself melodrama she never asks for. Caro, who swears in filings and makes judges smile anyway. Deshaun, who would never call himself a hero, and therefore is one. Eleanor, who brings me lilies on my birthday and asks if I want to go to the library book sale, even when I say I have enough books, which is a lie. Dr. Chow, who called me stubborn and meant it as a compliment. The respiratory therapist who taught me to breathe with a plastic toy that looks like nothing and is secretly a miracle. To you listening or reading now, tell me where you're from. Tell me if you checked on your mother's papers this week, or your neighbors, or the woman at church who bakes pies and never asks for anything. Tell me if you looked at an acrylic sign and knew it meant someone with perfect teeth wanted to take your shoreline and call it a community. The morning Victor took a plea deal, the sky over the marsh looked like the gray felt inside a jewelry box. Sloan held her chin at a brave tilt while her lawyer whispered whatever lawyers whisper when they've done all they can. The judge asked them both to say out loud what they did. Sloan chose passive verbs. Victor chose to sound like a man ordering supplies. The judge did not let them skip to the part where they walk out. That afternoon, I made chess pie and took slices to the city clerk's office because someone there caught a misspelled middle name and sent it to a corridor where it mattered. No one makes heroes out of clerks. That's our loss. Eleanor and I sat on a bench and watched people pay utility bills and ask which window to stand at and tell each other stories about their dogs. We ate our pie with plastic forks. It tasted like butter and apologies.
I don't pretend the world is fair now. I don't pretend a man typing up new LLCs can't still find a clerk who's new and wants to go home on time. I don't pretend some sons won't still decide their mothers are problems to solve.
But I also know a thing I didn't let myself know 24 days before the plat came down. I am not a soft place to land for liars. I am not a signature you can trace and call it a gift. I am my name on a brass plate, and the woman who put it back up herself. I am a ledger that balances even when numbers try to run. I am a harborer with rules, and a shoreline that says, come in if you're kind, keep moving if you're not. There's a photograph on my mantle. Anthony in his khakis, holding a mug we bought at a flea market that says, World's Okayest Dad, smiling like the secret of life was choosing okay and making it holy. Next to it, a picture of Evan at 6 with dinosaur pajamas and syrup on his lip, looking at me like I could make daylight happen with a joke. There's a new one now, too. Eleanor on my porch with lilies, her hand on my arm, our faces turned towards something I can't see in the frame. It looks like two women who learned how to keep their names and their houses and their dignity, and then taught a room full of strangers how to do the same thing without breaking a sweat. I told the story to the book club one night when the rain made the world intimate and the thunder sounded like applause. We ate too many cookies and used napkins like we were wasting them on purpose because we could. Someone asked me what I would say to the person who took my pearls and called me Miriam at my own door. I said I'd tell her she can keep the attitude and I'll be keeping the necklace. And then I'd invite her to sit down and hear how the marsh sounds at night when you listen like you mean it. Maybe she'd sit. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, the marsh doesn't care. It breathes in and it breathes out. And if you stand there long enough, you remember how to do it too. When the next envelope came, because there is always a next, I opened it at my desk with the good letter opener Anthony bought me the year we thought good stationery would change our lives. It was a notice about the rezoning of a parcel 2 miles away where the pines are sparse and the ground floods if you look at it wrong. I sent it to Raya with the subject line, "Your next story if you're bored." She wrote back immediately with a laughing emoji and the words, "I'm never bored." Then she wrote, "Proud of you." Then she deleted it because reporters aren't supposed to say that. I told her I saw it anyway. She said, "Good, that's how I meant it."
Evan will come home in 2 years if he keeps his head. He might live in a 1-bedroom above a barber shop and work at a place that pays him less than he thinks he deserves. He might learn to like waking up early because the air smells like the beginning of a thing. He might come over on Sundays and sit on the steps and talk to me about the beans he planted. He might say he's sorry in a way that looks like showing up. He might tell a boy with a scraped knee to hold still while he pours a clean sting on the cut and blows on it to make it better. He might remember to laugh when the boy calls him mean. He might say, "I'm not mean, I'm teaching you the trick." If you've stayed with me this long, tell me your city. Tell me whether the live oaks lean like old men where you are, or whether your sky is a wide western bowl, or whether everything smells like snow. Tell me if you know a notary who keeps a better journal than most men keep of their sins. Tell me if the neighbor 2 doors down needs help taking down a sign they didn't ask for. I have a screwdriver. I'm good with nameplates. The marsh will still be breathing when I'm done talking. It doesn't mind a monologue. It knows tides and patience and the sound of a desk being turned back toward the window. The chair fits my back better this way. The light hits the paper like forgiveness. The brass plate outside catches the sun and throws it back at the street. Some days I think that's all a life should do. Catch what you can and return it brighter. If you ever come to Savannah, walk down my block. It looks like a place where people say hello because they mean it. You'll know my house because the roses are trying again and the hydrangeas are deciding to forgive me. Knock if you want. I'll open the door. I'll call you by your name. I'll show you the harbor. It's not much. It's everything.